you remember my imaginary friends?
You can't remember if you're imaginary friends or the voices in your fucking head.
What's the difference? Do you remember what you would yell to me when I was off in my own world?
Gert to Gert.
Where are you, Gert? Earth to Gert. Gert. Earth to Gert. So I'm starting a podcast, and that's the title.
Gert to Gert.
Yeah. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Earth to Gert. Last episode, we talked about medication, which was the first tool I ever used for my mental health. Today, I'm going to talk about one of the last tools that I have learned to use for my mental health. This tool has taken me the longest to understand and to even accept as a tool to not only treat my mental health, but for the prevention of my symptoms as well. Today's tool is nutrition. But before you roll your eyes and think I'm going to ramble about everyone needing to go on a diet, please know that I am absolutely not suggesting that you do that, nor will I ever for any reason. The term dieting in our culture has come to mean something restrictive and punitive and is not at all anything sustainable. What I am suggesting, though, is that what we eat in our standard American diet is trash and it's poisoning us. And more than likely, it's the root cause of whatever illness or disease you're suffering from. The stuff we eat today that we call food is not actually food. By definition, food is any nutritious substance that people or animals eat or drink in order to maintain life and growth. The stuff we are eating to maintain life and growth is not at all nutritious. It's essentially void of any real nutrients. Our brains and bodies need nutrients to maintain life. It's really that simple. This shit that we are eating and drinking is the reason we are sick mentally and physically. This lack of actual nutrients in what we eat is why our brains and bodies are so fucked up. So while I'm not recommending any specific diet, I am highly, highly recommending that we eat food that actually contain nutrients in them. The cells of our brains and bodies need protein, need fats and carbs to function. Contrary to what they're telling you, carbs are not your enemy. But before we get into any more of the nerdy stuff and what a lack of nutrients is doing to our brains and bodies, let me tell you a little bit more about how I got to where I'm at with nutrition. I mentioned last episode that I had a friend that I opened up to about starting meds and my fear of the side effects. This friend conveniently is a licensed mental health counselor, and in addition to making me check in with her every day until I felt comfortable on the meds, she also gently, in a way only she can deliver, told me to exercise and to stop eating shit. So for the first 10 years or so of dealing with my mental health, I went at it with the idea that stop eating shit just meant stop going to McDonald's so much. I didn't realize how dangerous the everyday stuff I was eating and drinking was, like my addiction to Dr. Pepper and those half lemonade, half iced tea drinks. But more importantly, I didn't realize how dangerous it was for my mental health to not eat, to just raw dog my day on hot black tea loaded with 3 tablespoons of sugar. Yes, I used to put 3 tablespoons of sugar in my tea for breakfast. And for lunch, I'd have one of those drinks that I just mentioned with a bag of chips and maybe a bowl of ramen noodles. This complete lack of nutrients was absolutely awful for my brain health. The organ literally cannot function properly without nutrients. So things started to shift for me around 2018, 2019 in my understanding of food and its role in health. I had someone in my close circle chirping to me about not only the garbage I was eating, but what I was feeding my kids. She talked about the produce needing to be organic and the dangers of synthetic dyes and weird shit like wheatgrass shots and coffee enemas. Most of it I rolled my eyes at and picked on her for, except for maybe the coffee enema. That one still might intrigue me a little. So one day I was complaining that my daughter was having another one of her headaches. She just sort of bluntly chuckled and said, "Yeah, no shit, look at the garbage she just ate." And okay, so maybe my kid had just nailed her third bowl of that bottom shelf giant bag of knockoff Fruity Pebbles cereal. Like, that kid loved her cereal. And she also routinely suffered from headaches and migraines. She had MRIs and visits with a neurologist, but the only thing we ever got out of those appointments was a completely different diagnosis for something entirely different. We never found out officially what was wrong with her head. But after that comment about the cereal, I started to pay attention, and she wasn't wrong. Every time my daughter ate that cereal, she got a headache. So somewhere around 2019 is when we got rid of those garbage cereals from our diet. And after some other experiments, my kid has learned that it's likely the dyes that caused the headaches, because she also had to give up her addiction to Twizzlers and Swedish Fish. And if she overindulges in that shit, which she sometimes still does, because let's face it, at the end of the day, she's still a teenager and that stuff's good, she just pays for it afterwards. So then the pandemic hit. I was broke and single for really the first time in my entire adulthood. I mentioned that whole U-Haul lesbian part, right? Constantly being in a relationship meant I never really had to figure out dinner by myself. Prior to the pandemic, I had 4 meals I could cook. Except for lasagna, they all involve jars. Well, actually, my lasagna involves opening a jar too. Frozen and boxed foods. And when the pandemic started, I was working at our local senior high-rises with the old folks. Once or twice a week, we'd get produce donated and delivered to our buildings. And also, because I was broke, I'd hit up those food donation sites, like that huge one at the Washington County Fairgrounds. The tears I held back as one of my volleyball moms loaded my trunk with free food. I swallowed so much pride to even go there, and then I get in the line of someone that I know. That's an anxious fuck's worst nightmare. But I learned how to cook a pork tenderloin that week that I never would have purchased for myself. And with all that food and produce being donated, I had no choice but to learn how to cook. The fact that there was a global pandemic and all the lockdown restrictions in place, it gave me the time and the patience to learn. Was I successful with it all? Nope, not at all. But turning those nasty mashed turnips into a food fight is a core memory my children and I will have forever. So the experiments, even the fails, were absolutely worth it. And I highly recommend just randomly throwing food in your kid's face one day. It was so much fun. So for me, it was about learning to use what I was given. It's not like it went from those boxed and frozen meals to being Betty Crocker overnight. I was reading an old journal the other day, and I came across this from September 27th of 2020. I wrote, "I did awesome with dinners this week. Monday we had lasagna, Tuesday leftover lasagna, Wednesday I made chicken with butternut squash and carrots. The kids loved it. Thursday McDonald's, Friday Domino's. Oh well. But last night I was exhausted after work, but still put in an hour of cooking to make pork fried rice." So at first when I read this, I was like, awesome. I'm sorry, what? I was sort of judging myself for calling that awesome, but found this to be a nice reminder of how slow the process was for us. What was awesome for me then was the fact that I planned and cooked at home 4 out of 6 nights. I still primarily fed myself and my kids what I always had, but just added in better meals with better ingredients, either when I could or when it was given to me for free. Slowly over time, I built up my own little stack of recipes that I could make, and our trips to McDonald's are maybe once a month, if that now, and I couldn't tell you the last time I ordered Domino's, probably that journal entry. But what I didn't know at the time was that this switch to eating more whole foods was contributing to my mood and mental health improving at that time. And then the following years, when I enrolled in the health coach training program at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, this program taught me the science and benefits of not only the nutrition stuff, but so much more about healing the body and nervous system. I learned why that person in my life insisted on organic produce, and that, yes, those synthetic dyes and other toxic shit in the food that they let us eat was absolutely more than likely the reason my kid was experiencing so many migraines. So let's talk more about the nerdy stuff now. I've mentioned nutrients. I've mentioned that the cells of our brains and bodies need nutrients. Our organs, especially our brains, cannot function properly without them. There are actual structural changes that happen within the brain that affect our mood, our thoughts, and our behavior when we are deficient in nutrients. We've all heard, and I'm sure experienced, the term hangry, right? Getting angry when you are hungry is such a common symptom that we have an actual word for it. That's why I stress that our thoughts and mood can be symptoms of something else going on within the brain and body. We aren't just crazy and afraid of the world for no reason. There is actual science and biology at play here. So what are nutrients? Nutrients are substances that come from the food that we eat. Our bodies can't make most nutrients on our own, so we have to get them from the food. These substances are carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. Like I've said 1,000 times now, without these nutrients in our diet, our bodies cannot do what they are supposed to do. Our brains, at the very least, need carbs, fats, and proteins, not just for walking and talking and the involuntary stuff like breathing and pumping blood throughout our bodies, but we need these nutrients to regulate our mood, our thoughts, and our emotions. In our world today, we aren't eating foods with any of these substances. Our food today is filled with ingredients we don't know how to pronounce, and our bodies have no idea how to process. That's why in my early 30s, after a solid 10 plus years or more of eating very little nutrients, I couldn't handle a single conversation without crying. That's why I would snap at my children just for being children. That's when the shame and guilt were so loud in my brain, it showed up in the form of suicidal thoughts. And yeah, my life at that time maybe had reasons and conversations that were emotional. And my children often needed this mom to snap at them once in a while. And yeah, shame and guilt are normal human emotions. But throughout most of my 30s, I was hijacked by these emotions and hijacked by the anxiety and depression. And a huge part of all of that for me was because I was going through it all with a sick brain. My years of living the standard American diet, void of any real nutrients, left my brain unable to regulate my emotions, my moods, or my thoughts. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this nutrition piece was the last tool that I learned how to use for my mental health, and it's one that I can't let go of now. The weeks that life gets too busy and I revert back to convenience over nutrition, I notice it emotionally and mentally first. May and June have been hectic as fuck with lots of sports, lots of traveling and work, and my routines are out of whack. My meal planning has not been great, and it has resulted in me being far more anxious and emotional these last few weeks. But before I go any further with this nerdy stuff, I just want to take a minute to remind you again that I am not a clinician of any kind. I am simply giving you the information I have learned over the last 5 years through lots of books and podcasts, through the health coach training program, and just mostly through lived experience. I am not going to give you anything super technical because I don't know anything super technical. And I am certainly not about memorizing big words and trying to spit them out here to sound fancy. Fancy language, research, and science is all out there if you want to learn it all for yourself, which I highly recommend. I'm just trying to relay this to you in the way that I have come to understand it. So, what happens to a brain that is deficient in nutrients? I've mentioned that there are actual structural changes that occur within the brain. From what I consistently read and hear about, there are three main areas of the brain that are affected. The prefrontal cortex shrinks and shuts down. This area of the brain is for decision making, impulse control, and it helps out the amygdala in some way. The amygdala is the part of the brain that triggers our fight or flight. When that little guy doesn't get the nutrients it needs, it gets bigger and becomes overreactive, just like we do. And the other main region that I hear get talked about a lot is the hippocampus. This region of the brain helps us determine if a threat is real or not. And it sends signals that let us know that the threat is over. And again, this area, just like all areas of the brain and body, is greatly affected when it is deficient in nutrients. Basically freaking out over everything and never sending that signal that everything's safe. But my favorite thing that I have learned about the brain and experienced for myself is that it can heal. Research shows that with consistency and the right support, the brain can rewire and even regrow new tissue over time. And this is called neuroplasticity. So how do you heal the brain? Well, we're talking about nutrition today, so healing the brain physically involves healing the gut. I've mentioned this somewhere before, but 90% of serotonin, that feel-good chemical, that's made in the gut. Our gut is loaded with a whole colony of microorganisms that is called our gut microbiome. Our gut microbiome is highly influenced by what we eat. Eating the proper nutrients for our bodies keeps the good bugs in our gut happy and healthy. Processed foods and sugar feed the bad bugs. When there's an overgrowth of the bad bugs in our gut, that leads to all sorts of health concerns, especially mental health concerns. The health of our gut is so important to the health of our brain. So how do you keep your gut happy? Whole foods. Foods where the item is the ingredient. Foods that come directly from this earth, not things manufactured in a plant. Foods that do not have a marketing team behind them trying to convince you that they are healthy. Truly healing our brains and bodies requires us to go as close to a natural whole foods diet as possible. Eating the way we would have eaten 100 years ago. Because you know what didn't exist 100 years ago? 90% of the shit that we're suffering from today. So, some tips if you're listening and want to start cleaning up your diet. Start small. Find one area of your diet to clean up first. Maybe just start with breakfast. Food is fuel after all, and being mindful of what you're breaking your fast with is important. I definitely skip those cereals, even the organic ones. If you want my opinion, I still think all they do is spike your blood sugar without providing any real nutrients. I'd go for eggs, veggies, healthy fats, avocados, olive oil, yogurt. Yogurt without the 17 grams of added sugar, please. Get plain yogurt and add in your own sugar like fruit, honey, maple syrup. And I'm also going to remind you that I'm not a nutritionist. Do your own research, find what works for you. And I say anytime you can add in fresh vegetables, it will greatly help your gut and brain out. And one tip that really helped me was that my focus was not about what I couldn't eat. I mean, as I talked about, I added this stuff because I had to. But I have learned throughout the process that the more clean my diet became, the harder it became to tolerate the bad stuff. There are so many things now that my system just can't process anymore, and my body rejects it immediately, if you catch what I'm saying. Like ice cream and bacon. And another tip to remember, alcohol is a poison. It's a poison that kills the good bugs and the bad bugs, and it completely disrupts the microbiome. The same thing with antibiotics. There's science, research, or whatever out there that talks about the increase of mental health symptoms in the months after taking antibiotics. And there is evidence suggesting that people that took a lot of antibiotics as a kid are more prone to mental illness, especially depression and anxiety as adults. Just because in the process of killing whatever bacteria was causing the sickness, it also wiped out the good stuff. We need those good bugs in our gut to be healthy. So that's it. It's that easy. All that to say what Allison told me all those years ago. Stop eating shit. Who knew it would end up being my most important tool now? But actually, instead of stop eating shit, just start eating real shit. Real shit that's not processed and made for profit. Start eating real shit that your body and brain actually need. And if you need or want some additional tips or tricks, don't hesitate to reach out. Next week, I'll be back to talk about one of the most fascinating tools and experiences I have gone through, and that is EMDR. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So fascinating. I can't wait to talk about it. Thank you all so much for listening.